Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest video. This video is a bit of a request video. We've already done information on XAMPP and how to set up and configure that, but I've been asked about LAMP, creating your own LAMP stack and downloading Apache and MySQL and PHP and how all of that should be set up. In this video, we're going to actually concentrate on Apache, as that's the main part which needs configuration. What is a LAMP stack? Well, a LAMP stack stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, and/or Perl, and/or Python. You can have a WAMP stack, which is Windows, Apache, MySQL, PHP, etc., and you can have a MAMP stack, which is the Mac OS, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Right, so let's just having a look at Apache. The first thing that you need to think about is this a production server, or is this a development server? Because there are slightly different considerations that you need to take into account. The production server has to be more secure because this is public, have the access to this, and so you need to make this much more secure. The development server, normally under most circumstances, the public should not have access to the development server. It should be just the developers. So you can actually have a more development level security. To set up the public server, we need to first of all set the permissions for the directory var www public HTML. But before we do that, I just want to talk very briefly about do's and don'ts. First of all, you must never ever set the permissions to 777. This is suicidal, basically. You're asking for major trouble. So it doesn't matter who you are, what you are, you should never ever set the permissions to 777, except in very, very rare circumstances when you allow people to upload files to your server. And when you do this, it should go to a directory which is not accessible under the web, what we call the web root. So it can't be accessed from the web root. So there is an exception, but under 99.99% of the time, you should never set 777. It's really very bad. That's the first part. So what permissions should you set? Well, the var www directory comes as standard with an owner of root and root, and the permissions of 755, which basically means the owner can read, write, execute, the group can read and execute, and anybody else can read and execute. You inside this can then decide what permissions you're going to give the web-facing, the public-facing folder, which is usually public HTML _HTML. It might be www, it could be web. They have different names. You can choose what to have. What you should really have here is that the folder public _HTML should be set to 755, and the files inside should be set to 644. 755 basically means that the owner can read, write, and execute, and the group can read and execute, and everybody else can read and execute. 644 is a similar thing, that you've got read and write permissions for the owner, and the read and read for the group and others. Now, it depends on certain things. You might, under certain circumstances, need the group to be able to write to files, but this is very, very rare on a public server. So you should look at something like 755 for the directories and 644 for the files. If you want to set up the permissions so that it's relatively easy to edit files on the public server and that type of thing, then you would actually issue this command, which again is setting the permissions. It's recursive, which is what the R is. Then we set up the user permissions, which is read, write, and execute. And that includes directory execute because it's a capital X. The group and others are set to read, write, and execute. And then we go into the others and we remove the write. And this will give you the 775 and 664, which will allow the group to write. The next one we're looking at is medium. This is the default, which everything seems to come by for Apache, and so this is the 755 and the 644. So as you can see, the user is set to read, write, execute. The group and others are set to read and execute, and we've made sure that the group and others cannot write with the -W. If you want a high security, you can set it up to 700 and 600. Now, there can be some problems with this under certain circumstances. If you really want secure, you can go for 700 and 600. Okay, and then finally, you need to set the ownership of the public HTML folder, the directory. Now, the default is usually www-data, and the group is www-data. Under most circumstances, this will be okay. It should work fine for most things. There could be one or two scenarios where you might want to be able to write to the logs or something like that, but under most circumstances on a public server, which is all you're going to be doing is uploading files, you're not editing the files on the server, this should be fine. Right, let's have a look at a development server. Here we notice the permissions for the var www folder, not the one below it. So we're actually going to change this from root. The first thing we need to do is we need to change the permission to 775 and the files to 664. This will allow you and the group to actually be able to modify, write files into that directory and any subdirectories. Now that's quite important because on a development server you might be using a framework or something like that, and so consequently it needs to be able to write into the system and it needs to be able to read it. So 775 and 644 is usually a good compromise for a development server. The ownership, now you set this to you, and then it's a good idea to leave the group at www-data. You can change this if you want, that's your choice. But remember that if you're using a framework and the server needs to write to any of the directories or any of the files, then it will need access to it. Okay. You also need to edit the httpd conf file and change the user to you. Now, you don't do this on the public server. This is for you, and you can also change the group. If you've decided you're going to call the group development group or something like that, then you can change the group to you. and usually it's found in etc httpd conf httpd.conf. If you use this command sudo nano to edit it, you should be able to change the user and or the group if necessary that you require. Now again, this is for the development servers. Okay, just to show you what all of that means, I have here a www folder. It's in the var directory, and inside that there's a public HTML folder, and inside that we have an index.html, and as you can see, these are the default settings. But if you want to change the settings, it's quite easy. You can open a terminal. I'll just bring it down so you can see what happens. And if we change it, for example, to allow group access. Now, if you remember, that's the one that we showed you in the slide. So I'll enter that and put in my password, and you can see it's now changed these to 775 and 664. Right, so it's as easy as that to make the change. If you need to change it back to the default, then it's quite easy. You can use the default settings, and you can see I've changed everything back to the default settings. And this is what you would do for a public facing server. Now, if you want to make it into a development server, then it's quite easy. You would give it the first one I set up, this one here, as that makes it much easier for you to actually work on the system, and it allows the system to write in, if you're using a framework, into some of the folders. Now, to actually set the user up, you can see it's set to root here at the moment, so we now need to change that, and to do that we will use this command. Now notice the $user, that's a variable, so it will automatically give the right user. You don't have to worry about typing in your username. So if I change that, you can see immediately that these have now changed to me. And one of the reasons I'm using the graphical file manager is so that you can actually see the permissions and you can see the owners easily without me having to refresh the screen very much. So this would be a good one to set for a development server, and you've got it all set up so that you can actually read and write into that. Now, if you've done this, you actually need to make sure that you can write that your permissions in your server are set correctly. So we need to edit the httpd conf file. Now I'm actually using the one from XAMPP. So as you can see, the user here is set to www.data and the group is set to www.data, which is what you'd have on a public server. If you want to use it on your system, you'd then put in on a development server, you would put in the user, and then if you had, for example, a group called development, and then you would change the group as well, and you'd save that. Now, one of the other things that you also is a good idea to do on the development server is to come down and change the includes, and there's one marked virtual hosts. It's quite near the bottom, and what you need to do is write an include, and you just literally remove the pound, the hash symbol from before it, and that will allow you to use virtual hosts on your development server, because it's a good idea to set up a virtual host, for example, with the name of the website, but with .local rather than .com or .uk or .fr or whatever. So that would allow you to actually do that, and then you just save that and away you go. Now, occasionally you do have to tell the httpd conf file about other conf files, and this is how you do it. You quite literally, you put this include, and then you tell it about the other conf files that you need. So for example, if you've got a phpMyAdmin installed, you might need to include the path to your phpMyAdmin conf file. Okay, now that's it for setting permissions. As I say, you should never ever set 777. And finally, the www-data user doesn't actually have a graphical interface, so you can't log on with that. Right, that's about everything. I've created a gist which I'll link to in the notes below, so you can have a look at that and copy and paste anything you wish. And there's a bit more detail in the gist about sort of do's and don'ts. I hope you found that useful. My name's John, and we'll see you next time.